I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the fabric of my pale green gown, trying to smooth out the wrinkles that had appeared after the car ride. The night air had left my skin cold, but the warmth of the ballroom behind me was a welcome contrast. The glittering chandeliers above made me feel out of place, almost as if the lavishness of it all had an invisible, "Do not enter" sign for people like me. My name is Isabella Clark, and I was supposed to be here to celebrate my cousin Charlotte's wedding, but the moment I stepped into the grandiose countryside estate, I already knew this night wasn't going to be about me. I glanced over my shoulder at the sea of perfectly polished faces, all locked in conversation, all basking in the kind of status that felt alien to me. My father, Richard Clark, was deep in conversation with an architect who seemed far too important to spare a second glance at his daughter. My mother, Eleanor, was draped in a sparkling gown, effortlessly navigating her way through the room, greeting the high-profile guests she always seemed to collect like trophies. "Isabella, darling." My sister Caroline's voice sliced through the noise of the party. She was standing near the champagne fountain, her perfectly tailored suit hugging her frame in a way that made her seem as if she belonged in one of those glossy magazine photo shoots. She smiled when she saw me, but it never reached her eyes. "Still living in that little coastal cottage?" she asked, barely glancing at me as she took another sip from her glass. "Yep," I replied, forcing a smile. It was a sharp contrast to the shiny, sleek lifestyles that Caroline and the rest of the family had built. I knew what she meant. My life, my work, it was nothing compared to theirs. I was still the one who played at art, who dreamt of changing the world, not obsessed with maintaining a social image or counting my stock options. "Still painting and playing with clay, huh?" Edward, my older brother, added from behind her, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yes, Ed. And I'm quite happy with it," I said, my voice tight. He was one of the first to remind me of my art experiments and bohemian lifestyle. To him, my life was nothing more than a joke. I wanted to tell them, all of them, about Verdant Innovations, the company I'd built from the ground up. About how we had just sold our patents to Tesla for almost $2 billion. How my revolutionary eco-friendly materials were about to change the construction world. But I stayed silent. What would be the point? They'd only find a way to dismiss it. So I stayed quiet. "Did you see Charlotte's dress? Absolutely divine, isn't it?" Caroline continued, her eyes lighting up with the kind of admiration I'd never received from her. She wasn't looking at me anymore, but I could hear the condescension beneath her words. I nodded absently, then excused myself, slipping past them before the conversation could drag on. I could already hear my father's booming laugh from the other side of the room, a sound that always had an effect on me. His reputation as a celebrated architect was everything to him. And me? I was just his least practical child. But I had my own achievements now. I didn't need their approval anymore. I hadn't for years. Still, tonight I had to endure their subtle dismissal, and all I could do was smile and nod, pretend like it didn't bother me. As I walked further into the crowd, I could see them all, the guests who marveled at the Clark family's social reputation. But as I glanced at my reflection in the polished mirrors on the ballroom walls, I realized that, tonight, I was invisible. And that's when it hit me. Maybe that was the best thing for me. Because out here, in the silence of my own thoughts, I wasn't pretending. I was finally living on my own terms. And they would never know the truth. Not tonight. Not yet. As I wandered deeper into the crowd, trying to escape the stares and conversations that seemed to constantly reflect the image of who I wasn't, my father's voice broke through the hum of chatter. "Isabella, darling, come over here. I want you to meet someone." I turned, just in time to see Richard Clark waving me over, his chest puffed out in his usual commanding manner. Standing next to him was a tall, well-dressed man in a dark suit with salt and pepper hair, and an air of authority about him. "This is Henry Blackwood," my father announced, his smile wide, his hand extending to the stranger. "He's the CEO of Blackwood Construction, one of my biggest clients. Henry, this is my daughter, Isabella." I extended my hand, forcing a smile. Henry Blackwood looked me over with a polite but disinterested glance before shaking my hand briefly. The kind of handshake that made it clear he had better places to be. "It's a pleasure," he said, his voice flat, his gaze already drifting to the next person in the crowd. "Isabella here is." Well, she's our least practical child, Richard added with a small, forced chuckle, as if it were some kind of joke. She's a bit creative, you know. Likes to play with paint and clay and build things. Never could quite get her head out of the clouds. There it was. The familiar sting of being reduced to nothing more than a hobby. My father's voice rang in my ears as his words hung in the air, heavy and dismissive. I forced myself to maintain the polite smile. Nice to meet you, Mr. Blackwood, I said, my tone even. The worst part? I couldn't even be angry. After all these years, I was numb to it. Henry Blackwood finally turned his attention back to me, but only because my name had triggered some sort of recognition in his mind. His eyes flickered for a second, narrowing slightly as though he was trying to place me. Wait a second, he said, his voice suddenly sharper, the slight interest in his eyes shifting. Isabella Clarke. Are you the one behind Verdant Innovations? I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden change in tone. Yes, I am, I said, trying to keep the tremor of surprise out of my voice. He smiled, nodding as if it had all clicked into place. The woman who revolutionized sustainable building materials, the one with the carbon-negative concrete alternative. He raised an eyebrow. You're doing incredible things. I've heard a lot about you. My heart beat a little faster. My father's expression faltered as he stared at me, his eyes betraying the faintest hint of something, surprise, maybe even disappointment. But it was quickly replaced by that familiar mask of indifference. Henry Blackwood leaned in slightly, his smile widening, a genuine sense of interest now crossing his features. I've been following your company for a while now. I didn't realize you were Richard's daughter. I nodded, my stomach twisting. Yes, well, I prefer to keep a low profile. My work speaks for itself. Of course, he said with a respectful nod. And speaking of work, he continued, turning back to Richard, I was hoping we could explore some new opportunities for sustainable construction in the upcoming city project we're planning. Your daughter's work might be exactly what we need. My father stiffened. His smile faltered just for a moment, a twitch of discomfort that almost felt like a crack in the armor. But then it was gone, replaced by the smooth mask he wore for people like Henry Blackwood. Well, I'm sure Isabella would be thrilled to discuss the details with you, Henry, Richard said, his voice suddenly tight, too smooth. He cleared his throat. But we were actually in the middle of a conversation. Perhaps another time? Henry seemed unfazed by the subtle dismissal. I'd love to, Isabella, he said, his eyes glinting with an excitement that I hadn't seen in anyone around here. Let's set up a meeting. I think your work could really revolutionize how we think about construction moving forward. Absolutely, I replied, my voice steady. I'll make sure to reach out. As Henry walked away, I noticed my father's face, pale now, his lips pressed into a tight line. He turned to me, his gaze sharp. You could have handled that better, he muttered, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. I opened my mouth to respond, but stopped myself. What was the point? What was there left to say? Instead, I smiled faintly, the weight of the moment sitting heavily on my chest. I didn't need his approval. Not anymore. And I was done hiding the truth from them. Back then, I'd wanted them to see me for who I really was. But now, I didn't care if they ever did. As I watched Henry disappear into the crowd, I realized that the truth was out there. And sooner or later, they'd all have to face it. But for now, I was content to let the whispers build. I barely had time to catch my breath before Henry Blackwood returned, his tablet in hand, his face focused. Isabella, he said, his voice low but excited. I think I found something you might want to see. He scrolled quickly, tapping on his tablet with a speed that made me wonder if he had just been waiting for the right moment. Then he turned the screen toward me. I leaned in, not sure what to expect. And then I saw it. The headline in bold letters read, Isabella Clarke, the woman redefining sustainable architecture. My heart skipped a beat. I had seen the article before, but to hear him bring it up like this, out of nowhere, it felt surreal. And for a moment, I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. But I forced myself to stay upright, to take the heat. Wait, this is you? Henry asked, his voice tinged with surprise. I mean, I knew the name sounded familiar, but I didn't realize you were the one behind Verdant Innovations. I nodded, my stomach a little tight. Impressive, Henry continued, scrolling down to show me the next part of the article, where it mentioned the $1.9 billion acquisition of our patents by Tesla. I had no idea you were doing something this big. I mean, we're talking about the future of building materials here. This is huge. I could feel the eyes of the people around us slowly shifting toward me. Richard's face was now ghostly pale, the color draining from his cheeks. He was frozen, staring at me as if he'd just seen a ghost. Well, I said, trying to keep my voice even, it's been a lot of hard work, but I'm proud of what we've built. I glanced at my father, who now looked like he might collapse right there. I've always believed that sustainability is the future of architecture. Absolutely, Henry agreed, his voice warm, almost admiring. This is groundbreaking work, Isabella. And the best part? It's already getting attention from some of the biggest players in construction. People want this. The room around us had fallen into a heavy silence. The hum of the gala almost non-existent as everyone seemed to take in what had just happened. All the conversations that had filled the space moments before seemed to have been wiped away, replaced with whispers of my name. My father, still standing a few feet away, looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I looked back at him, meeting his eyes for the first time that evening. His face was tight with discomfort, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. I could feel his pride, the one he had so carefully cultivated over the years, being punctured, one word at a time. Henry was still talking, praising the impact of my work on the future of construction. But all I could hear was the ringing in my ears, the years of dismissive comments and barely veiled insults from my family. My father's disapproval, Edward's ridicule, Caroline's cold indifference. You did this? Richard finally managed to croak, his voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through the quiet of the room. I nodded again, my throat suddenly tight. $1.9 billion, he repeated, as if trying to wrap his mind around it. $1.9 billion, I confirmed, watching as the reality of it settled over him. He stared at me for a long time. And then he glanced away, his gaze lost in the crowd. Henry continued to talk, oblivious to the growing tension between father and daughter. I think this could be a perfect fit for our upcoming projects, he said, smiling at me with that same professional enthusiasm. I'd love to explore the possibility of working together on something big, something to really showcase this kind of technology. I couldn't tell if Henry had just noticed my father's discomfort, or if he had simply missed it entirely. Either way, he was too excited about the potential of our work to notice that the balance of power had shifted in the room, and the one person who would have normally basked in the glory of such a connection was now struggling to process it. Richard's eyes darted to my face once more, but I couldn't bring myself to look at him. Not now. Not when he was trying to process a truth that was never meant to see the light of day. Instead, I focused on Henry, forcing a smile as I shook his hand. I'd be honored to discuss potential collaborations. Let's set something up soon. I didn't wait for my father's response. I couldn't. The sound of my heels clicking against the polished floor seemed to amplify in my ears as I walked away, leaving behind a stunned silence and a room full of high-profile guests that had just witnessed a private revelation. As I disappeared into the crowd, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of liberation. The truth was out there now, and it would echo in the air for the rest of the night. My family, for all their judgment, would have to confront who I had become. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was the one who needed to apologize. The buzz of the gala had faded into the background as I walked further into the crowd, searching for a quiet corner to regain my composure. My pulse was still racing, the weight of Henry's words reverberating through me. I hadn't planned for this moment, not like this. But it had happened, right in front of them all. I made my way to the far side of the room, leaning against a stone pillar, and taking in a deep breath. The sharp, confident faces of the guests around me had become a blur. The glittering chandeliers, the flowing gowns, the expensive colognes, they all felt like part of a world I wasn't meant to be part of. Not the way they saw me. And yet something had shifted. I wasn't the person I was before. Not anymore. My silence had been a shield, but now it felt like a fortress crumbling. Isabella. I turned at the sound of my name. Edward stood there, looking at me with wide eyes, his perfectly pressed suit at odds with the confusion on his face. His posture was stiff, his usual arrogance absent for once. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice tight with disbelief. I took a step back, the edge in his tone slicing through me. "What was what?" "That," he gestured vaguely, his hands trembling slightly. "That whole thing with Henry Blackwood." He looked almost nauseous, trying to process it, but there was something in his gaze that bordered on fear. I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I crossed my arms, my gaze unwavering. "It's called success, Edward. Something you might not understand if you keep mocking me like you always do." His face turned a shade darker, his expression morphing into something I couldn't quite place. Was it envy? Discomfort? "You sold your company," he muttered. "For how much?" $1.9 billion, I said, the words tasting both sweet and bitter as they left my mouth. Edward's jaw clenched. "You lied to us," he hissed, taking a step forward, his voice low but full of the kind of anger I'd never seen from him. "All this time, you made us think you were just some artist, living in that little cottage, wasting your time with your hobbies, and meanwhile you were sitting on a gold mine." "It wasn't a lie," I shot back, my tone firm. "I just didn't think you'd take me seriously. You never have." Edward stared at me for a moment, his eyes flickering between disbelief and frustration. "We've been over this before, Isabella. You're not one of us. You'll never be one of us." "I was one of you," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I am one of you, but you've never seen me for who I am. You've only seen what you want me to be. Someone who fits your idea of success. You never asked about what I was doing. You never cared to know." Edward scoffed, shaking his head. "You could have told us. You could have shared it with us. But no, you hid it. You sat on it like it was some dirty little secret." I shook my head slowly, the words catching in my throat. "It's not a secret, Edward. You never cared to ask. You still could have shared it, even if you didn't think we'd understand." His voice softened, but there was a coldness creeping into his words. "You could have been part of this world, Isabella. Instead, you chose to shut us out." I stared at him for a long moment, trying to hold back the flood of emotion threatening to break through. "I didn't shut anyone out. I just stopped asking for permission." Edward opened his mouth to say something else, but before he could, Caroline appeared by his side, her sharp heels clicking against the marble floor. She looked at me, her gaze icy. She didn't even spare me a smile, just a tight-lipped expression of disgust. "Isabella," she said, her voice dripping with that same condescension I had learned to ignore over the years. "We need to talk. Alone." I glanced at Edward, who was still standing there, frozen, unable to process what had just happened. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. But he didn't stop Caroline. He didn't say a word. He just stared at me, like I was something foreign. I followed Caroline away from the crowd, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what was coming, and I had been preparing myself for it, but nothing could have prepared me for the cold, calculating tone in her voice. "Don't pretend like you don't know what's wrong with this picture," she said as we moved farther from the party. "You just embarrassed our entire family. In front of everyone. Henry Blackwood, of all people." "I didn't embarrass anyone, Caroline," I said, my voice steady but full of the weight I had been carrying for years. "I didn't do anything except succeed. And maybe, for once, that's something you should be proud of." She laughed, a bitter sound that didn't match the polished image she always tried to project. "Proud? You think we're proud of this? We're embarrassed, Isabella. You think you can just shove that in our faces and expect us to cheer for you? Do you think you're better than us now? Just because you sold your company?" I froze, her words cutting deeper than I expected. "I never said I was better than you," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "But I am different from you. I'm not chasing after an image, Caroline. I'm chasing something that actually matters. And I've been doing it alone without anyone's help." "You didn't need help," she spat. "You needed approval. That's what you've always wanted. You've never been part of this world, and you never will be." I felt my chest tighten, the sting of her words almost suffocating. But I held my ground, refusing to let her see how much she'd gotten under my skin. "I never asked for your approval. I just wanted to be seen. But you're right, Caroline. I'm not part of this world. and I'm not going to pretend to be anymore. Caroline's eyes flickered with something like annoyance, maybe even jealousy. Fine, she said, her voice sharp. Do what you want. But don't come crawling back to us when it all falls apart. Because it will. I'm sure Henry Blackwood will forget about you the second you're no longer useful. I felt my heart sink, but I stood tall. I don't need him, Caroline. I'm not your backup plan anymore. Not for you, not for anyone. I turned away from her, my mind racing as I made my way back to the crowd. But this time, it wasn't just about the business success I had worked for, it was about freedom. The freedom to walk away from the family that had never truly understood me, and to stop caring about their judgment. I wasn't going to let them break me anymore. I couldn't. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that weight lift. The cool air hit me as I stepped out into the terrace, away from the suffocating silence of the ballroom. I had barely caught my breath before I heard footsteps behind me, slow and purposeful. I turned, expecting to see another member of my family, ready to throw another insult or passive-aggressive remark my way. But instead it was Henry Blackwood, his tall figure cutting through the crowd. He smiled warmly when he saw me, his earlier enthusiasm still evident in his expression. I hope I didn't keep you from your family for too long, he said, his voice carrying the same easy charm he had before. I shook my head, trying to smile back. It's fine. I just needed some air. Well, he began. I have to say, I wasn't expecting that little revelation earlier, but it's hard to ignore. Not when you've got a $1.9 billion deal in the bag. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his straightforwardness. I didn't exactly plan for it to happen like that. But sometimes you don't get to choose the timing. Henry laughed, glancing back toward the ballroom, where Richard and the rest of the family were still awkwardly picking up the pieces of their shattered assumptions about me. I think your father is still trying to figure out how to recover from that. I couldn't help but let out a small, almost bitter laugh. I'm not sure he ever will. But it's not my job to clean up his mess anymore. Henry nodded thoughtfully. You know, I can see why Richard's a little rattled. He's built his whole reputation on what he's done. But you. He looked at me, eyes full of admiration. You built something that doesn't need anyone's approval. You're in a position now to define your own worth. I couldn't help but let his words sink in, the quiet affirmation of something I had struggled with for so long. Maybe Henry was right. I had been hiding for far too long. It wasn't about the business or the money. It was about being seen for who I truly was, not the version everyone else wanted to shape for me. You know, Henry continued, his smile growing. I've been thinking. That city project I mentioned earlier? It's going to be a major development. New green spaces, sustainable buildings, the whole package. I can't think of a better person to collaborate with on this than you. The work you're doing is the future of architecture. Hell, it's the future of the world. I blinked, surprised by how eager he sounded. But there was something in his eyes that told me this wasn't just about business. He wasn't just impressed by the work. I could see that he saw me, saw the value in me beyond the name or the reputation that had been so carelessly dismissed. You really mean that? I asked, my voice steady but laced with curiosity. Absolutely, he said, his voice unwavering. I've seen a lot of innovation in this industry, but what you're doing, it's different. It's real. It's meaningful. He paused, looking out over the estate grounds. I think we could build something incredible together. Something that lasts. I felt my heart race with the possibilities. I'd like that, I said, a sense of excitement bubbling in my chest. Let's talk more about it. I'm all in. Henry's smile widened, the genuine admiration in his eyes settling into something more personal. I'm looking forward to it. Just as we were about to continue, I noticed a group of wedding guests passing by. They were all whispering, their eyes subtly shifting to me, no doubt discussing the little scene I had just caused. But instead of the shame I used to feel, I felt a strange sense of power. For once, I wasn't shrinking into the background. I wasn't trying to make myself small to fit into their expectations. Let's find a quiet spot to talk, Henry suggested, motioning toward the garden. We can make plans without the crowd. I'd like to hear more about your vision for sustainable architecture. As I followed him toward the garden, I glanced back over my shoulder at the ballroom, where my family was still caught in their own web of confusion and disbelief. They didn't understand what was happening, what this moment meant for me, but that was okay. They didn't need to, because, for the first time, I realized that the world outside their bubble had been waiting for me to step into the light. And this time I wasn't going to hide. This wasn't just a business deal. This was my chance to create something bigger than myself, something that could change the world. And I was going to do it on my own terms. Henry led me toward the quiet of the garden. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, truly heard. And as we spoke, I realized that the person I had always been, the person my family had never understood, was finally stepping into her power. And I wasn't looking back. The gala had long since settled into its routine rhythm, the loud music and clinking of glasses filling the air. But for me, the night had shifted. Everything felt different now. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others. I had just secured a potential partnership with Henry Blackwood, something that could change the course of my career. But before I could let myself fully embrace the excitement of it, I knew there was one more thing I had to face. I hadn't planned on staying much longer. But then I saw my father across the room, his posture rigid, as he exchanged pleasantries with some of the other guests. When his eyes met mine, he froze for just a second, then quickly looked away, clearly trying to keep his composure. I didn't want to confront him. Not tonight. But it was inevitable. My throat tightened as I walked over to where he stood. He didn't even seem to notice me approaching, until I was right next to him. "Isabella," Richard said, his voice strained, as if the words were too much for him. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't expect you to still be here." I wasn't sure what I expected. A compliment? An apology? But instead, all I got was this awkward attempt at normalcy, as though everything had been swept under the rug. "I didn't expect to stay this long either," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "But Henry Blackwood wanted to speak with me about potential business opportunities." I saw the flicker of something in his eyes, surprise maybe? Or guilt. He quickly covered it, though, and nodded, as if trying to mask the discomfort. "That's good. Really good," he said, his voice a little too tight. "I'm glad to see you're finally making something of yourself." There it was. The same backhanded compliment, the same veil of indifference. He was trying to act as though nothing had changed, that he hadn't just learned that his daughter, his least practical child, had just sold a multi-billion-dollar company to Tesla. "Finally." I echoed, my voice cool. "You mean you weren't proud of me before?" Richard shifted uncomfortably, glancing away for a moment before meeting my gaze again. "Isabella, let's not do this now, okay? Not here, not in front of everyone." "I'm not doing anything," I replied, my voice growing a little sharper. "I'm just asking questions. The same questions I've been asking for years. Why didn't you ever believe in me?" His face darkened and he took a step back, as though preparing himself for something. "I always believed in you, Isabella. But you always had your head in the clouds. I didn't want you to get hurt. I just wanted to protect you." I blinked, surprised by his words. He wanted to protect me? That's what this was about? All those years of mockery, of being told I wasn't practical, of my work being dismissed as a hobby. This was his idea of protection? "I didn't need protection," I said, shaking my head. "I needed support. I needed you to believe in me the way I believed in myself. You never gave me that, not once." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. He was struggling to form a response, caught between the version of himself he'd always presented and the reality of what I had become. After a long silence, he finally spoke again, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "Isabella, I didn't know. I didn't understand what you were doing. But that doesn't mean I didn't care." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. The man who had always been too busy to pay attention, too consumed by his own world to see mine. The architect of his own success, who never once stopped to question the cost of ignoring his own daughter's dreams. "You're right," I said quietly. "You didn't understand. And you didn't care." The words hung in the air between us, thick and heavy. For a moment, I thought he might argue, but instead he seemed to shrink. He looked at me, his eyes heavy with regret, and I realized he wasn't going to fight back this time. He couldn't. Not with the truth staring him in the face. I've spent my entire life trying to prove myself to you. I continued, my voice steady now, more resolute. And for the first time, I realize I don't need to. I don't need your approval anymore. His gaze softened, the lines on his face deepening as if he were finally seeing the truth in front of him. The truth I had always known, but he had been too blind to understand. Isabella, I'm sorry, he said, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. I know I've failed you. I see that now. I see who you are. And I'm proud of you. I always have been. I just didn't know how to say it. I took a deep breath, the knot in my chest finally loosening. It wasn't the apology I had imagined. But it was enough. For the first time, Richard Clark was admitting that he had been wrong about me. You don't have to say it now, I said, my voice softer, calmer. I don't need it. I've moved on. There was a long pause, and for a moment, we just stood there, the weight of everything between us. Finally, Richard spoke again, his voice trembling. Isabella, do you think there's still a chance for us? To start over? To understand each other? I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw him not as the father I had always tried to impress, but as the man who was finally seeing me for who I had always been. I don't know, I said slowly, my heart heavy. But I'm not going to beg for it. If you want to understand me, then show me. Show me you're willing to listen. But don't expect me to wait around for you to get it. Richard didn't respond. Instead, he just nodded, his face still pale, but there was something different in his eyes now. Something like understanding, something like hope. As I turned away to leave, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. Not just with him, but with myself. The truth was out now, and the world, his world, my world, had to adjust. And for the first time in my life, I was no longer afraid of what they would think. The gala had slowed down by the time I stepped outside to catch my breath. The evening was beginning to blur into a haze of loud voices, clinking glasses, and half-formed conversations. My mind was racing. I had just turned a corner with my family, and the ground beneath us had shifted. But now it was quiet. Still. As I walked toward the garden, I saw Richard standing near a secluded corner, away from the hustle and bustle. His posture was stiff, as if he were still trying to hold on to the image of the man he had always been. But his face was different, softened, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it before. Isabella, he called softly when he saw me approach. His voice was quieter, the words more carefully chosen. I didn't know what to expect. There was a part of me that still wanted to yell at him, to demand more from him. But another part of me wanted to hear what he had to say. He gestured for me to sit beside him on the bench. I hesitated for a moment, then complied. The cool night air brushed against my skin as I settled next to him. The sounds of the party still faintly audible in the distance. I've been thinking, he started, his hands folding and unfolding in his lap as he spoke. About everything. About what I said earlier. And about what you said. He paused, swallowing hard. I was wrong, Isabella. I was wrong about everything. I looked at him, my chest tight. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this. If I was ready to hear my father admit he had been wrong. To see him let down the walls he had spent years building between us. But his words hung there, unspoken for so long, and now they were tumbling out. I thought I knew what was best for you, he continued, his voice shaky. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you away from your dreams, your hobbies. I thought I was saving you from disappointment, from failure. He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. But I see now. I see now that I wasn't protecting you. I was stifling you. I was holding you back from something great. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. It felt like I had waited my entire life for this moment. The moment where my father would finally see me for who I really was. And now that it was here, I didn't know what to do with it. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. For everything. For dismissing you. For not believing in you. For making you feel like you had to prove yourself. I see now that I've been blind. And I hate that. I hate that I made you feel like you had to earn my respect. He paused, taking a shaky breath. I never saw how incredible you were. How much you've accomplished. And now I do. And I'm proud of you, Isabella. The words felt foreign, strange even. I had heard them in my mind 1,000 times, but hearing them from him, it was a different thing altogether. It was both the thing I'd always wanted, and the thing I'd been waiting for far too long. And now it felt like it had come too late. But something inside me softened. For the first time, I realized he wasn't just apologizing for the past. He was acknowledging me. For the first time in my life, he was seeing me. I'm sorry too, I said softly, my voice almost catching in my throat. I'm sorry I needed to prove myself to you. I didn't want to be invisible anymore. I didn't want to hide. Richard reached out, his hand shaking slightly as he placed it on mine. I froze for a moment, then let him. I can't change the past, he said, his voice low. But I want to make things right. I want to know you, Isabella. I want to be your father, not just the man who's been too busy to understand you. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words crashing down on me. I don't know if I can forgive you right now, I said, my voice trembling. It's going to take time. I can't just forget everything. I don't expect you to, he said, squeezing my hand gently. I just want you to know that I see you. And I want to be part of your life again. In whatever way you'll allow me. I closed my eyes, feeling the tears sting at the corners. For a moment, I wanted to collapse into him. To let go of all the years of pain. All the frustration that had built up inside of me. But instead, I stayed still. The weight of everything we had been through sitting heavily between us. I don't know if I'll ever need you the way I once did, I said quietly, my voice steady. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to rebuild. Slowly. Together. Richard nodded, his eyes glassy, his voice thick with emotion. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to rebuild. We sat in silence for a while, the night wrapping around us like a blanket. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were both in the same place. Not where we had been, not where we wanted to be, but somewhere in the middle, where we could finally start fresh. I don't need your approval anymore, I said after a long pause, my voice more certain now. I've built something on my own. And I don't need to prove anything to you, or to anyone. But I need you to accept me. For who I am. No more pretending. I accept you, Richard said immediately, his voice thick with sincerity. Ido. I'm sorry for all the times I made you feel like you had to be something else. You're perfect the way you are. I smiled softly, the first real smile I had shared with him in years. It's a start. Richard nodded, his hand still holding mine. It's a start. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I realized something. We didn't need to go back to what we once were. We didn't need to rewrite the past. All we needed was to move forward. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The evening wound down. The music now a faint hum in the background as guests began to trickle out of the ballroom. My father had said his piece, and the weight of the conversation had left me feeling strangely lighter. Yet there was still more to process, more to come. As I stood near the door, slipping my coat on, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I checked the screen. It was a text from Edward. Can we talk? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Edward had never been a big fan of showing vulnerability, especially when it came to admitting when he was wrong. But something in me pushed back against the idea of leaving things unresolved. If I was going to rebuild this relationship, I had to face it head on. Even if it wasn't going to be easy. I stepped outside onto the terrace, the cold air biting at my skin as I dialed his number. The call rang 3 times before he answered. Yeah. His voice was tight, guarded, but there was a hint of something underneath it, something that might have been guilt. I got your message, I said, my tone calm. What's on your mind? There was a long pause before Edward spoke again. And when he did, it was with a sort of hesitation I wasn't used to hearing from him. I don't know, Izzy. I've been thinking about what happened tonight. About everything. About me. I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess I've been a real asshole. All these years I kept telling you your work was just some hobby, and I never even tried to understand it. Never even thought about it, really. I just thought it was all so unimportant compared to what I was doing. I felt a knot in my chest loosen slightly, but it wasn't enough to make me forgive him just yet. You were never interested in understanding me, Edward. Not really. You've been so caught up in your own success that you didn't even care that I was trying to build something real. I know. And I'm sorry for that. He let out a sigh. Like the weight of those words was harder to say than he expected. I didn't know what to make of you, Izzy. I didn't know what you were doing, and I didn't care to learn. It wasn't until tonight that I saw it. Saw you for what you really are. And I feel like I missed out. Like I could have been part of something, but instead I just mocked it. I closed my eyes, leaning against the stone railing, the night air cold but grounding me in the moment. It's a little late for that, don't you think? I know, Edward said, his voice cracking. And I don't expect you to just forgive me. I don't even deserve it. I've been a jerk. But I'm trying. I really am. And I know I can't take back all the years I wasted not seeing you for who you are. But I want to try to fix it. If you'll let me. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief stirring inside me. I don't know, Edward. It's not just about saying sorry. You've hurt me a lot, and I can't just forget that. I've spent years trying to prove myself to you. And you never once saw me for who I was. Not really. I see you now, he said softly. Ido. And I regret the way I treated you. You're not just my little sister anymore. You're someone who's changed the world. And I should have respected that from the start. I stood there, feeling the cool night air on my face, taking in the reality of what he was saying. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there could be room for us to rebuild. I'm not sure where we go from here, I said, my voice quieter now. But I'm not shutting you out. Not completely. Thank you, Edward whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't expect things to be perfect, but I'll be here. I'll prove it to you. You deserve that. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I'll hold you to that. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't a perfect resolution. We weren't fixed, not yet. But it was something. It was progress. I was about to head back inside when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Caroline. We need to talk. Don't think you're just going to walk away from all this. I rolled my eyes but didn't hesitate to respond. What do you want, Caroline? Her reply was almost immediate. You've made your point. But I don't think you fully understand the damage you've caused. You might have made a name for yourself, but you've shattered the family. We'll never be the same. I sat down on the bench, my fingers gripping the phone. I didn't shatter the family. I just stopped pretending to be the person you wanted me to be. A pause. Then fine. But don't come crawling back to us when you realize how much you've lost. I stared at the screen, trying to steady my breathing. My relationship with Caroline had always been a game of one-upmanship, and tonight, she had thrown down the gauntlet. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I tapped out my final reply. I've lost nothing. I've only gained my freedom. I didn't wait for her response. Instead, I put the phone in my pocket and stood up. The night was quiet, and though the weight of everything that had happened hung in the air, there was a sense of finality to it. The family I had once desperately wanted to belong to had turned its back on me when I refused to be what they wanted. But now, for the first time, I realized that maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. As I walked back into the party, the chatter and laughter around me seemed distant, like I was floating above it all. My family's expectations no longer felt like chains. I didn't need their approval to be who I was. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. I was done waiting for them to accept me. I had already accepted myself. The wedding reception was winding down, the night slowly fading into a quiet calm. The music had softened to a lull, and most of the guests had begun to trickle out, their laughter and chatter fading into the night. I stood outside on the lawn, watching the last of the glittering lights on the estate flicker as the evening wrapped itself up. The air was cool, the soft rustle of the trees in the breeze providing a calm backdrop to my thoughts. For the first time in what felt like years, I was alone, and it didn't feel empty. It felt freeing. I'd spent my entire life trying to make my family proud, trying to fit into a world that had never truly seen me. Tonight had shattered the illusion. And yet, as the dust settled, I realized something. I didn't need their validation anymore. I wasn't searching for their approval. Not because I didn't care, but because I had finally found something better, myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out. A text from Henry Blackwood. It was great meeting you tonight, Isabella. I'm looking forward to our future projects together. I'll have my team send over some details tomorrow. I smiled as I typed back. I'm looking forward to it as well. I'll reach out soon to discuss next steps. I tucked my phone back into my coat pocket, taking a deep breath. Isabella. A voice called out from behind me. I turned to find my father walking toward me, his steps slow but deliberate, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I wondered if he was coming to say something more, to apologize further or maybe offer an explanation. But as he approached, he stopped a few feet away, as if giving me space. We stood in silence for a moment. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I even needed to say anything. The conversation we had earlier had settled in my chest, a quiet understanding between us. But I needed to hear it from him, one more time. Isabella, he started again, his voice softer now. I know I can't undo the years of distance, but I need you to know that I'm proud of you. Not just for the business or the success, but for the person you've become. You're not just my daughter. You're someone I respect. And that's something I've been blind to for far too long. His words were raw, unpolished in a way that made them feel real. I had expected a polished apology, the kind he had always given, something neat and compartmentalized, like one of his grand architectural plans. But this was different. This was him, vulnerable and exposed. I met his gaze and saw something I hadn't seen before, something I had spent so many years wishing for. It was a glimmer of respect, of understanding. Thank you, I said softly, my voice steady despite the weight of the moment. That means more to me than you know. Richard nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at me. There was no more prideful distance between us, no more walls of expectation. I'll never fully understand your choices, Isabella. But I will always be here for you, however you need me. Just don't shut me out, okay? I took a deep breath. There was so much unsaid between us, but somehow, this felt like enough for now. I won't, I replied, my voice steady. But I need you to understand that I'm not the same person I was when I left home. I'm not asking for your approval anymore. I'm living for myself, not for you or anyone else. I get it, he said, his voice quiet. I get it. And I'll respect that. We stood there for a moment longer, the space between us comfortable, not filled with words, but with an understanding that had never been there before. Finally, Richard smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. I guess I'll see you at the next family dinner? I couldn't help but smile back. Yeah, I'll be there. But I'll be bringing my own stories this time, not just listening to everyone else's. He chuckled softly, looking forward to it. As my father turned to leave, I took another deep breath, the weight of the night lifting. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't carrying the burden of their expectations anymore. I had stepped into my own life, my own success, and that felt better than anything they could have ever given me. I took one last look at the estate, the lights dimming around me, the last whispers of the party drifting away. It had been a night of revelation, of truth finally spilling into the open. But it wasn't just the business success or the deal with Henry that had changed everything for me. It was the realization that I no longer had to hide. I no longer had to play their game. The evening was quiet now, but there was a peace I hadn't known before. It wasn't the calm of silence, but the peace of acceptance, of who I was, and of the journey I had taken to get here. I wasn't a daughter, a sister, or a bohemian anymore. I was Isabella Clarke. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I needed to be. And that was enough.